Okay, so without further ado, do we need more ado? Okay, without further ado, this is our 11 a.m. talk here in the Manning Room at Hope X, and this one is ethical questions, and it's going to be Declan. See, I can't even read anymore.
Well, you were confused and thought this was a biotech hacking panel, I think.
And Nick, welcome, guys.
Okay, thank you folks for joining us today. I should say by way of full disclosure that my bio on the Hope website is a little out of date. I left CNET/CBS a few months ago to found a news-related startup. You can find out more about it and sign up for the beta at recent.io, recent.io. So we're here this morning not to denounce illegal, unwarranted, probably unconstitutional government surveillance. I mean, we know the arguments. We've been there, done that, and all of you should have been in Edward Snowden's talk yesterday. Anyway, instead we're going to try to address a different and maybe more difficult point, which is how a service provider can conduct itself ethically. And by service provider, I mean, this is a pretty general term where I'm trying to be very inclusive here. Email, IM, chat, social networks, photo sharing, ISPs, pretty much anything. So I think it's fair to say that it's better to answer these questions early on before the feds show up with a court order of dubious constitutionality, demanding something that you may be unwilling or worse yet unable to provide. So today we have with us immediately to my left, your right, Nicholas Merrill, who with the ACLU successfully challenged the portion of the Patriot Act that expanded or rewrote the rules for national security letters, including a gag order that the recipients always are delighted to receive. And we have with us Ladar Levinson, who ran LavaBit. Your reputation precedes you. Which for folks of you who are not clapping, and probably should have been for both of them, it was used by Edward Snowden, an email provider. The feds last summer obtained a search warrant demanding that LavaBit turn over the private SSL keys that protected web traffic to the site. In response, Ladar shut down LavaBit even though he had spent the last previous 10 years building it. So these two gentlemen are privacy heroes. They have a strong sense of what's right and wrong for service providers to do, and I'm delighted that they're here today. So, we wouldn't be having this session here at Hope if it weren't for Edward Snowden, but it's been over a year since Edward Snowden's disclosures started to appear in The Guardian and The Washington Post and elsewhere, and what's really changed? I mean, I think it's fair to say that the left coast Silicon Valley companies are more sensitive to the topics, are more willing to challenge things in court, or at least speak publicly about the ongoing existing challenges. But over these right coast companies that we all kind of use, whether we like it or not, AT&T, Comcast, Verizon, I mean, some of these documents that Snowden leaked refer to productive surveillance partnerships. I'm quoting, by the way, those are productive, and partnerships are in these docs that go back decades with these phone companies. The names are redacted, Company A and Company B, but the market share info is there, and you just correlate with the FCC docs, and you realize, oh, they're talking about AT&T and Verizon. Surprise! So what's actually changed, either of you?
Well, I think the market has certainly changed. Privacy has become a differentiator that consumers pay attention to. And services and businesses that build products designed to protect the privacy of their users are seeing a huge upsurge. Unfortunately, as a company that operated in that space for about 9.5 years, I don't get to take very much advantage of it, but I still like to see it going on. The question really is, where do you draw the line in terms of your willingness as a business to protect your users' privacy? It's kind of hard to operate as a business in any country if you're completely unwilling to obey the laws of that country. But at what point do the laws become unjust, unethical, unconstitutional, and how and why should you fight them?
One of the things that I think has changed from my perspective is I've been feeling, and a lot of people I know have been feeling, this growing lack of trust in the public source cryptography that's out there. there was a little bit of news about NSA's working within all the task forces that define the different crypto protocols, in particular like the NAIST curves, and it's led me to sort of back up a bit and start to wonder about all the weird little occurrences, the heartbleed bug, a couple of other things where just like one line of code was added and it undermined an entire set of libraries that was underpinning a lot of the web traffic that people wanted to keep private. And so it's led me to start to think more about the idea of layering lots of different protocols, and kind of going even beyond like a belt and suspenders approach to like belt and suspenders and duct tape and string. Like we run a Jabber server which forces everyone to use TLS, but then it also forces people to use end-to-end OTR, and it also offers the ability to use it as a Tor hidden service. And ideally, if you could use these different layered protocols, when the heartbleed bug happened, our Jabber server was vulnerable to that, but OTR wasn't, and Tor debatably might have been. But by layering the different protocols and sort of introducing within the layer cake protocols that government people weren't involved in the defining of, I think it seemed a bit nuts at first, but that type of approach is I think something that people are going to have to start to be considering as we move forward.
Ladar, let me ask you this. You previously, going back in time, complied with narrowly tailored court orders in the past before shutting down LavaBit, because I think you told me when we did this out when we did a public event in San Francisco last year that it was it went too far across the line. But where is this line? I mean, if you're giving advice to folks in this room who may be running providers or technical staff at them or thinking of founding them, I mean, where do you draw the line between acceptable compulsory surveillance and unacceptable surveillance? Is it targeting a specific user versus wholesale bulk surveillance? Where's this line?
So personally, and this is obviously just a personal opinion, not a legal one, I draw the line at the Constitution. When there is a warrant issued by a judge for an individual user's data that is not overly broad or generic, then I believe it's just and right, and I should do everything I can to cooperate with law enforcement, because I think I enjoy the fact that I don't have to worry about somebody breaking into my home or stealing my car. I enjoy the rule of law, and the rule of law requires that law enforcement be able to collect evidence and prosecute criminals. Where I drew the line was when I'm talking to these agents and they said, well, then you just have to turn over your SSL key. And it just struck me on so many different levels, because I understood, one, that SSL key belonged to me, not the user. Two, that from a technological perspective, because they had no idea where the suspect was connecting from, they were going to have to decrypt and inspect the contents of everyone's email passing through the server, just to presumably isolate the information that they were going after. And three, I was completely uncomfortable with law enforcement having unfettered, unaudited, unmonitored access to all of this information that I felt it was my primary responsibility to protect. So for me, that wasn't just a toe over the line, that was what line? And for me, it kind of took on an added component of malfeasance or villainy when I was told that I couldn't tell anyone I had even received this request.
Could you talk to an attorney? Was that clear or implicit or explicit?
So this question comes up a lot. could I talk to an attorney? Yes. In this particular instance, because the order in question was the byproduct of a criminal indictment in federal court, I was able to consult an attorney for the purposes of interviewing them to retain their services. When you're dealing with a classified warrant, the rules change. When you're dealing with a classified warrant, you actually have to consult the FBI first and verify that the attorney you want to speak with has the requisite clearance and get permission to tell them. So it really depends upon the circumstances. But in either case, you're denied the ability to send out a call for help. For me, I knew exactly which mailing lists to go to. I've been a member of the OpenSSL developers list for 10 years. That very day, my gut reaction was to send out a message to that list and ask if anybody had ever heard of something like this before. I had done research on the internet looking for law review mailing lists that focused on information technology law and wanted to send out a similar message to those lists and see if I could find an attorney to help with my case. And I couldn't. I was denied what I thought were inalienable rights guaranteed to me as a citizen of this country and a prerequisite for receiving a fair hearing. I mean, the list goes on, but it really changed my thinking about where to draw the line. Not sure how long I should ramble on for, but...
Well, when in doubt, let me cut you off.
Okay.
We'll get back to this in a sec. Both of you did the right thing, the ethical thing, when the Fed showed up with overly broad or potentially legally problematic surveillance demands. And so far, history has vindicated both of you gentlemen. But these were small businesses. So Nick, you were trying to raise a few $million a few years ago when I interviewed you for CNET. Let's say that you're running an ISP or email provider and you become wildly successful and Emmanuel plugs you on Off the Hook and Snowden Ellsberg joins your board and everyone in this room who's kind of slacking right now turns into a paying customer. You do an IPO and you get 100 million users, and the feds come calling with a surveillance demand. They have a court order, and they were requiring you to install what they're saying is a custom port reader box on your network. It's been designed by the feds. The FBI has a laboratory just for this in Virginia, and they say it's going to only intercept metadata. And they've sworn this to the court, and the court order is legit. And you fight it in court, and you lose before a district judge in an appeals court. So what do? Do you shut down and strand your 100 million users and get sued by your investors? Well, what do you do ethically here?
Well, part of my thinking in this respect is that, if people in this room are going to do a new startup today, you have to kind of anticipate these things, and then in your design spec from the very beginning, you have to try to create a situation in which you cannot provide data.
I tried that, remember?
Yes. But the problem was you had these keys that could unlock data. And so, for instance, earlier I was talking about the Jabber Calyx Institute org server forcing people to use OTR end-to-end. If you create a situation in which only the end users hold the keys, then the service provider cannot be forced to hand anything over. And basically, one of the things that we're working on now in terms of, we have a prototype that we're building with the intention of it being used on public networks like library, public internet, or internet cafes, or organizations that have open Wi-Fi, which is devices that torify the traffic and automatically send everything over the Tor network.
What if the request is a little more nefarious and what they want you to do is reconfigure your systems to inject something onto the user's device?
And
because you don't have access to the data.
This is like the forced, this is the Fed malware, a forced update of your antivirus software, operating system, or whatnot.
Windows update?
Windows, exactly. Okay, so this is the hypothetical.
Some of this gets beyond the technical level and into legal questions. And one of the questions that a bunch of people that I consult with and I have been discussing is the idea of the separation between the provider and the developer of the software into separate legal entities. because I think that the bar would be much higher to impose a change in software or inserting a backdoor against an organization that does nothing but develop software, as opposed to actually being a service provider. So if you have a separate legal entity that develops the software and a separate legal entity that is the provider doesn't write the software, but they are subject to all these laws like CALIA. CALIA is, what is the acronym? It's like
Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement.
Yes. So this law forces service providers to be able to provide a real-time stream of either telephone calls or internet traffic to the feds in real time. So you have to essentially have a plug for them to plug into, and all your equipment has to be compliant with their specs. Now, there's no simple way to get around that. And one of the scary things about CALIA is that if you are not compliant with it, it not only can have civil penalties, but there are actually criminal penalties. So you can go to prison if you set up a system that does not comply with it. Now, I don't see an easy way around that, except to ensure that the data that's passing through is encrypted on the client's device with keys that the service provider does not have. And then again, this idea of having the software development part and the service provider part being in different legal entities, I think creates a situation in which it would be extremely burdensome for the government to force a developer to put a backdoor in that way.
But I've got this modified version of eJabber-D that I really want you to run, and it's going to be injecting this malware into pigeon clients as they connect.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there is a weird thing that I've noticed in terms of judges. Like, you ran into problems with judges in which, a judge can issue an order and they kind of have free reign. I've been in court and seen people be rude to a judge and be instantly sentenced to 2 weeks in prison just on the spot. And judges have a lot of leeway. They can issue orders, which I suppose you can always appeal and go to a higher court, but if you don't, those orders stand and those judges are like little kings. And so if they tell you to do something like that, that's when you get into a super difficult situation where maybe you're going to decide to implode like Ladar did with LavaBit. Although I think my tendency would be to call up the ACLU again and have a discussion about whether this is legal or constitutional.
Let me inject a personal note here. So I left CNET to found a news startup that will intelligently recommend articles based on what it understands your interest to be. And if you read a lot of articles on a certain topic, the feds, in theory, might be interested. Give us the identities of anyone interested in Al-Qaeda or explosives or both, never mind that there are legitimate reasons to be interested in both. So what I've done is put in the privacy policy, and my attorney rolled her eyes at this. As of today, we have not received any legal process or demand from any federal, state, or local government, no NSLs, civil subpoenas, search warrant, FISA orders, etc. We received no legal orders requiring us to monitor users' future activities or to modify our service. If we do receive any form of compulsory process, etc., etc. Is this is kind of a warrant canary in a privacy policy? Is this something that an ethical company should do? What would you recommend in this case? Or just not offer the service at all?
So this reminds me of a conversation I had with the prosecutor in my case after the hearing I had in DC, where I tried to explain to him, amongst many concerns, one of the ones that I had was continuing to advertise my service as secure once I had knowledge of a little black box on my network sniffing up all the traffic and knowing that SSL was no longer protecting the information as it traversed the wire. And I said, well, could I at least modify my site to remove, some of these marketing materials? And he said, no, you can't make any changes to your site or your materials that would in any way indicate to the suspect in the case that there may be an investigation going on.
But this is an FBI agent.
This was an assistant U.S. attorney.
So this was an
senior
AUSA.
assistant U.S.
But this is not the same as a court order saying. AUSAs make claims that may not be legally grounded. But I think Nick wanted to jump in with a thought.
Warrant canaries, I've always thought that they're an interesting idea, and I love legal hacks of that sort. I've had talks, though, with really knowledgeable civil liberties attorneys who kind of laughed and said, you're going to be charged with contempt if you try that. But someone has to try. I would love to see it happen. I don't know that I want to be that person. So I'm not convinced 100% that it would work and that it wouldn't result in someone going to prison, but it would certainly be nice to see someone take that stand. You know, there was another legal hack that I floated that was kind of similar, like a trick in that I was talking about what about if you made your passphrase for your key an incriminating statement. So you say something like, on the 5th of July, 1982, I stole a car and drove it into a river. And that way you could plead the fifth and refuse to give your passphrase. But
then they'll give you use immunity and say we're not going to prosecute you for it.
Yeah,
Perhaps,
I was
but
going
then
to
you have
say
to
we need to
carefully
check with a
choose what
lawyer
your
on that
statement
one
is,
first.
you know, it
Kill
could be
someone to
something,
make it really convincing.
right,
Okay,
right.
maybe we're not going to go down this path. This may not be the ethical approach.
But these things, I think you'll get thrown in jail. That's what I've always been told.
Are there some services that maybe we just can't ethically offer? Let's say there's a new company called Know You Better that's going to give you a free computer, but we're going to like analyze everything on your phone, everything, assuming a rooted phone, the contents of your phone calls, everything on your PC. You'll plant audio
I
plugs
thought
in your
schools
house.
were doing that.
Hold on. The GPS trackers in your phone. It would actually be a really good personal assistant. It would be like a real Jeeves in your pocket. But it might be a one-stop shop for government surveillance. Can we just draw the line and say it's unethical to ever offer this?
Hell yeah.
This is why you do not. This is why you're not living in Silicon Valley right now, I think.
It is completely unethical to give somebody a device without informing them that the sole purpose of that device is to collect personal information on them.
Well, you get a free computer, you get a free phone out of it. It just tracks you. I mean, you disclose this all.
I mean, there are a lot of things out there. You could argue that Google and Facebook and your mobile phone are what you just described, except that they don't advertise it as being a tracking device. And in the case of your phone, they make you pay to carry the tracking device.
Well, there is the idea of informed consent. So, you know, are we in a situation where the person has been informed and given their consent to be monitored, say, in participating in some academic research study? That is at a very different level than, say, manipulating data on a large social networking site and seeing how it influences the mood of your users.
I'm not going there. That's a different topic. We could spend a whole day on that. So, but both of you are. I mean, you mentioned Google and Facebook. You're kind of proposing an alternative to Google and Facebook, and maybe you even want to compete with them at some level. But can I ask you this? Are some of these let's assume that the right coast companies with these long-standing, decades-long partnerships, they're probably not going to change their response right away, but maybe the left coast companies are different. I mean, I was the first to disclose last May, before anyone ever heard of Edward Snowden, that Google was fighting the feds over not just one but two national security letters, including one here in New York. Google adopted forward secrecy before anyone else and turned on HTTPS by default in 2010. Yahoo didn't until earlier this year, and last I checked, still doesn't support forward secrecy. Twitter notified some of the WikiLeaks folks, including Jake, that they were the targets of a court order. I can't imagine Facebook doing that. Can we say that some of these companies are more ethical than others? Is there a continuum? EFF has that privacy scorecard, who's got your back, every year.
Oh, there certainly is. And unfortunately, because so much of this stuff plays out in back rooms and outside of the public eye, it's really difficult to tell which companies are worthy of your trust and which ones aren't. And that's why the EFF scorecard is so valuable, because they do their homework and give you a summarized answer of how good is this company about protecting your privacy. Nick?
On a certain level, the whole business model of data mining the user's data and then providing targeted advertising based on that is kind of it kind of has to be thrown out the window if you're going to be really serious about privacy. And I think as tough of a hill as it is to climb, you know, we really have to think about sort of moving back to the fee-for-service model, because
You'll pay with a credit card.
You can. There are alternatives. There's Bitcoin. There's,
Cash.
There are some like more cash. There's
Remember
more,
cash?
There's some semi-anonymous ways to deal with it. But I guess my point is, regardless of how you pay, if you're going to move to a model where the service provider does not have access to the communications of the users, then you can no longer data mine it. You can no longer sell it to data aggregators, and it cannot be a revenue stream. So you have to figure out some other way to sort of capitalize in your business model when you're designing it right at the beginning. And unfortunately, fee for service it's hard. When there's so many things like Gmail out there for free that are so convenient, that work so well.
Or $50 a year, and you get your no ads. Google, Google Apps for Business or Education.
I was going to say, I think the ethical question also changes when you're allowed to inform your users when you turn over their data to a third party. And that third party doesn't necessarily have to be, a government request. It could be, a research company that you're partnering with. And I really think that's the direction we need to move in, is every time a credit agency gives my personal information to a potential lender, they have to let me know. And I should be able to get a copy of that very same data myself. Taking it into the context of law enforcement, what really bothered me was the fact that I was seeing firsthand that people were being accused of crimes in court. Warrants were being issued to conduct surveillance, and nobody was ever being arrested. And because they were never arrested, they never had an opportunity to face their accuser or set the record straight. Take it one step further, you've got a service provider that's turning over their personal information indefinitely. That information is then being collected, coalesced, and eventually used against them, and they have no ability to get a copy of that very same data to use in their defense. I think the equation really changes with secrecy, and I think that we need to move away from that. I'm willing to say that if I were to ever restart LavaBit, I think I would change the way I responded to law enforcement requests, and I don't think I'd ever feel comfortable again servicing a law enforcement request that remained secret indefinitely. So the question becomes, how long should it remain secret? The Supreme Court has said, for a very good reason, that our right to free speech is superseded by the government's need to conduct investigations and keep the targets of those investigations secret. But is that right indefinite? Where does it end? When does it stop? It's been a year now, and I'm still not allowed to discuss who the target was of, the investigation that led to my shutdown. Nick, it's been about 10 years. I think you have some news on that front, don't you?
Yes, sort of. I've been continuing to fight the gag order that I was placed under in 2004 for now 10 years, a little bit more than 10 years. And as time has gone on, I've slowly chipped away at it. For the first 7 years with the help of the American Civil Liberties Union, and more recently with a legal clinic at Yale Law School, the Media Freedom and Information Access Law Clinic. They're really great people. I've been blessed to have pro bono legal help for free. If I didn't have that, I would not have been able to make any progress in my legal case. The most recent thing that happened a few weeks ago was that I finally earned the right to talk about the target of the underlying investigation in my case, because now the FBI finally admits that there is no underlying investigation there.
What, you mean the secrecy just expired magically and you were allowed to talk?
No,
or?
that's the thing. That's the thing.
Who is the target?
Well, the irony is that I'm not going to tell you who the target is because the target doesn't want me to reveal their identity. And I respect their right to privacy. It's a private individual. It's not an entity or an organization. that's sort of interesting or newsworthy. It was just a person. So I don't want to like reveal their name, but I finally could tell my wife, you know, that I've now been married like 4 years, and I was finally able to like explain to her exactly what happened. However, I'm still partially under a gag, and essentially my national security letter was 3 pages long, and the 3rd page was this appendix that listed all the types of information that the FBI was demanding from me, and it was completely redacted, and all you could see was that they left the bullets of each line unredacted, so you could count them, so it was like 16 bullet points. But I'm still not allowed to talk about what types of information were sought from me, and in a lot of ways that is the meat of the public policy discussion of what types of information is the government allowed to gather on all of us without any actual suspicion of a crime having occurred.
Can I ask you this? There's NSLs, if you read the actual text of the statute, which I did not for 6 months or 8 months, but it actually seems rather narrow. But I've heard, not from you, but from other folks, that the government's interpretation has expanded over the years. Would you generally agree with that statement or disagree?
I don't know how they're being used. I mean, thank God I've not received another one. Although, you know, I would love to have another crack at challenging the statute. And I was always disappointed that what happened in my case was that we won at the lowest court level, and the NSL provision was ruled unconstitutional, and then we kept winning, and eventually the government withdrew the letter, which removed my legal standing to challenge the illegal search. And I think, you know, they didn't tell me, and I can't read their minds, but I think that this was a tactical move for them to avoid losing in the Supreme Court, which would have potentially invalidated the entire Patriot Act, and there was a lot at stake for the government. But it left a bitter taste in my mouth because essentially they just ran away, and the issue wasn't able to be adjudicated, you know, so we don't know what the Supreme Court would say on that. And I feel like that this issue of warrantless surveillance has become, whether it's because of political infighting and wanting to slam the current president, or for whatever reason, but it's become a huge bipartisan issue in a way that it wasn't several years ago. And I would be curious to see how the court would rule on warrantless surveillance. But we haven't. Every time that a person or an entity has challenged national security letters at the constitutional level, there was my case, and there was the Connecticut librarians, and there was also the Internet Archive out in San Francisco. Every time that someone has shown willingness to take it all the way to the top, the FBI has always withdrawn the letter and just said, okay, like we don't want that data anymore, seemingly for tactical reasons, to avoid actually having the courts rule on the legality of it.
Well, I was going to say, I think it's pretty clear the FBI thinks they can get access to anything that they want, even if it doesn't reside in this very country. But what I was going to ask you, Nick, is how long do you think it's ethical to keep the name of a suspect in an investigation secret?
You know, that's the thing. I mean,
I was looking for a number.
I don't know. Like, I don't claim to be an expert in law enforcement, and
It's not a legal question.
I think that there should clearly be some type of a statutory limit set. You know, whether it's going to be 30 days, 90 days, or some number has to be set. It can't just be that hundreds of thousands of NSLs go out and every recipient is gagged, and then they're gagged forever. That was ruled to be unconstitutional repeatedly. So the fact that the courts, the lower courts and the appeals courts, have all said that this is a violation of First Amendment rights, and that it continues to go on and on is completely unacceptable. But I think, and this is kind of conjecture, but I'm pretty sure that the vast majority of NSLs go to the big providers. They go to AT&T, to Verizon, you know, to Comcast, et cetera, and unless those companies are willing to take these challenges all the way to the Supreme Court, I don't see how we're going to find out the answer to the ultimate constitutionality.
And they've shown zero willingness to do so. Let me open this to the audience. We promised, the folks at Hope promised wisely or unwisely, that we would give you the opportunity to ask questions about things like software design, API design, network design, policy. So we're here and at your disposal. If you want to identify yourself, feel free. If not, it's a hacker conference. You can make something up.
I'll use my name on my Verizon prepaid cell phone, John Doe. I took Mr. Levison's public advice and I moved my email to a VPS in Iceland, and I'd like to offer that to a few friends. I was wondering at one point, do I become subject to CALEA? And I'd like a follow-up question, please.
You become subject to CALEA if you're using the plain old telephone system here in the United States, because any service provider or telecom company that connects to the POT system here is subject to the provisions of CALEA, which is why VoIP providers, for example, wholly VoIP providers are still allowed to a certain extent to offer some levels of encryption. If you were to use a telephone company, a VoIP telephone company, like one that starts with the word silent, which is based abroad intentionally to avoid the provisions of CALEA, then, that was why they did it the way they did. They're now headquartered in Switzerland. I was going to say that the laws over in Europe are interestingly and varied and different from the ones here. Iceland is interesting because in Iceland, the right to speak freely is sacrosanct, but yet the government still has the ability to conduct secret surveillance. They're a member of the EU. They're subject to these external jurisdictions. For me, I tend to prefer the model of a fixed amount of time that the government can conduct this secret surveillance, 30 days, 60 days. I don't think I'm really comfortable with the secrecy lasting longer than that. I think if they've had you under surveillance for 60 days, they should either file charges against you and/or you as a provider should be able to notify them that you've been violating their privacy and turning this information over so that they can begin the process of searching for a lawyer and preparing a defense. I think we kind of violate due process by going any farther than that. And it's interesting to look at Europe because there are a lot of countries that feel the same way and actually have laws in place that require the service providers to notify the users whenever they receive a request from law enforcement for their information. And I believe that's the way it should be. You shouldn't have your information slurped up, stuck in a gigantic database forever and ever and never know that you were even a suspect, except until maybe you decide to fly internationally and you get the rubber glove treatment when you go through border security.
Ladar, you're sounding almost libertarian. You want to come out of the closet?
No, I'm sounding like an American.
Yeah.
Good applause line. Okay, with that, there's also one thing to keep in mind is that the FBI, probably acting as a proxy for the NSA, has been trying to expand CALEA for something like 8 years. If you do some searches for Going Dark, this is the name of their initiative to convince Congress to expand the CALEA to things like social networks, email providers, not your traditional telecommunications providers.
Going Dark. Thank you. And my follow-up, Mr. Levison. I understand that being formed as an LLC caused issues for your representation when you had to go to court. Was that the case? And
no.
Would you recommend a specific form of organizational formation?
So it's interesting. I've learned a lot about the law in retrospect, and one of the things that I learned is that typically an LLC, a corporate entity, is actually not allowed to appear pro se or without counsel. But it's interesting because the appellate court decided to overlook that for the very same reason that the judge did, that they were in such a hurry to drag me into court that I was effectively afforded about 4 days to find an attorney to represent me in court in Virginia, which is about 1,000 miles from my home. And because I was dealing with a secret proceeding, I would have to call each individual attorney one by one, explain the circumstances of the situation to them, which would take anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, depending on how quick the attorney was, and then ask for their advice about how to proceed. And I ran into this problem of when speaking with a criminal defense attorney whose sole mission in life is to keep their client out of jail, they couldn't comprehend that I was willing to go to jail to defend the Constitution. So their advice was, give the government what they want or be prepared to go to jail. And I was like, well, I don't really need an attorney for those two options. I need...
Okay, let's take the next question.
Thank you.
On the subject of NSLs, I'm familiar vaguely with the legal concept called declaratory judgment. Is there a reason that even though you don't have standing to challenge one anymore, you can't seek declaratory judgment as someone who could be affected by one?
I think that's a Marcia question.
I think Ladar is referring to Marcia Hoffman, who's sitting in the front row and is a former EFF attorney. Do you want to stand up, Marcia, and say anything? Hold on. Right here's the microphone for you.
So are you basically asking whether one could use a concept of declaratory judgment to get the entire statute invalidated? Is that the idea?
Just as an ISP, whether you could say, I'm worried that I will be affected by one of these, I would like the court to judge whether or not this is constitutional.
So the thing about going to court to challenge something is there's a concept of standing, which means that the court can't really make a judgment about a dispute unless there's actually a real thing that's happening, right? And so you can't take a hypothetical dispute to a court because basically, there's nothing that is going to be determined between two people or two particular entities by that judgment. At least that's kind of, that's the basic idea of the theory. And so you can't go to court and say, I think there's a time in the future where possibly I could have a problem here, and I'd like you to declare that I would be in the right. So you kind of have to wait for the right circumstance to come up before you can do something like that. So, that's why these two guys happen to be in the position to try to do that when they went to court. So it's a good idea, but I think unless you have something that's really crystallized and actually can be decided, it doesn't work.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
don't quote me on this, but I believe in 2004, which was when you began fighting the NSL, there were something like 12,000 of these letters sent out, and only one person stood up to challenge it, and he happens to be sitting next to me. If we look, I think, at the last year or so, I think that number has reached the double digits. But the fact is, when so many of these letters are going out so quickly, you've got two problems. You've got both a fear to fight, and you've got this sort of lack of knowledge amongst our peers, you folks in the audience, about when they receive a request like this, how do they evaluate whether or not it's just legal and ethical, and whether or not and how they should fight? Because there is no guidebook on ethics for ISPs. It's not a class you take in college. You sort of have to do all of this stuff on the fly, and because of the secrecy involved, you have to do it in a vacuum.
Let's take another question.
So I have a question and an anecdote. My first question is, Ladar brought up that his service says it's totally secure, but if the FBI breaks it all and then it's totally insecure, aren't there some sort of huge FTC implications for that? Because you're still advertising as being secure, and so aren't they then putting you at risk for
Yes,
civil
there
judgment?
are, and currently the FTC hates the FBI.
Awesome.
No, I actually heard somebody from the FTC say this at a privacy conference, that this is a huge problem internally. But if you look at it in terms of both budget and influence, guess who wins?
Probably the surveillance
The
state.
one protecting the consumer or the one protecting the state?
And I have an anecdote having to do with CALIA, actually. So I used to work for an organization that makes wireless mesh networking software. And so a local organization had this issue where they wanted to set up a huge mesh network in DC, and they had funding, and it was a great project, and they had everything set, and it was fine. And so they set all of these things up in DC, and then they say, hey, this would be so much better if we could connect it to municipal internet. And so they contacted the municipal internet, and they initially said, yes, this is fantastic. And then they sent a follow-up that says, hey, you can't actually do this because on review, none of your devices are CLIA compatible, because they're just typical OpenWrt compatible routers that you can buy anywhere. And even though the fact that CLIA doesn't actually, cover wireless mesh networking was totally irrelevant, so they sent another letter that was like, no, we were just going to go forward with this because you already said we could. And they say, if you do this, we will be forced to intervene. And so that was just very random and strange, and CLIA is a weird thing, I think.
CLIA as a statute on paper is narrow, and it originally referred to just phone companies, but FCC, through issuing papers, has slowly expanded it. But it wasn't done through Congress, and it wasn't done through amending the law. But over time, now universities have to be subject to CLIA, university networks, VoIP providers, and it's sort of debatable whether a mesh networking provider is an ISP and whether it should be subject. But a lot of this is happening through, diktats issued through FCC that are not being debated openly in Congress and that are not really subject to public scrutiny. And it's a really awkward situation.
And at least in my case, the AUSAs involved effectively felt that the assistance provisions of CLIA actually applied to me. And they admitted that it wasn't written into the law, but that Congress had expressed this intent by passing CLIA, even though if you look at the legislative record, they debated whether or not to extend at the time the assistance provisions of CLIA to internet service providers and decided explicitly not to. So it's kind of a selective memory question.
You're right. Louis Freeh, the then director of the FBI, told Congress absolutely no, it's not going to apply to email, and he used that term. But ethically speaking, CLIA 1994 law created this disturbing presumption. The feds have a rule that says, in some cases, new technologies may not exist unless they're wiretap friendly. And think of the implications for this as we go forward. Yes, we have time for a few more questions.
Hi, I'm Bart Gelman, and I've...
And who do you work for?
I'll take the fifth on that. So I think I've become slightly more interesting than I used to be to
I know how that
surveillance types, yes. And it's no secret I've publicly advertised that I have a Jabber account on, CCEDE and a Rise Up account, and hypothetically I might even use the services of somebody else here on the panel. And I wonder, to put it in a very exaggerated fashion, whether how you assess the risk that you're in effect creating a honeypot for the government by attracting a large fraction of troublemakers.
It's definitely it's a troubling question. It's an awkward one. Actually, part of why I decided to set up the Jabber server that we run was because I started to worry about the CCC server. And just noticing how many people I was communicating with were using this server, and the fact that it's located overseas, and then some of the revelations from the Snowden documents were that all the overseas traffic that was encrypted was being stored forever, so that they could sit there banging on it and trying to decrypt it. The other problem, from my point of view, was that the CCC server, not to pick on them, it's a great service that they run, but it wasn't forcing forward secrecy. It only recently became available as a Tor hidden service, and so it seemed like there was a lot of room for improvement there. But you definitely have a point that I think decentralization is extremely important. Actually, the Tor project guys are working on a Tor-based instant messaging client, which is supposed to be completely decentralized. And I think that is a really interesting development, and it's a really important one. But I think it can be mitigated by offering access to the servers as Tor hidden services only. So I think Tor, as a layer on top of existing applications, can really do a lot in terms of obscuring metadata, obscuring geolocation data, as well as encrypting the content.
I was going to say, it's
sorry,
the freedom
we're
hosting
running low
problem.
on time. Let me, I will go to closing statements in a sec. One more quick question, only one, please.
It's a comment, actually. There wasn't an unanswered question, I feel. There was, I think, the question was, how long is it ethical to keep records from the feds, basically? And I would answer to that It's basically indefinitely. I don't believe it's actually ethical to snitch on our users. That's not our job. That's the police job to surveil people.
Yeah,
And
I mean, ideally,
my experience with the
feds
law
should go to the user to get the information, right? I mean,
right.
that's
So
the way it's supposed
my
to work.
experience with the law is that the only way to protect ourselves from the law is to stay as much as possible anonymous, as to make zero knowledge services, because they're not on our side. The law is not on our side, and it's not helping us, and it's not helping. So this is what we call suspects are very often political activists. They're not criminals, and they're treated as criminals. So we need to protect those people, and fuck the law.
Okay, last thoughts, you two. You got like 1 minute or 2 minutes left.
All right. I was going to say the big problem is that we're all lazy and we like the convenience of modern technology. We like to be able to send messages from a device in our pocket and access the internet from it. We like to be able to sit down at our home computer and browse the web at high speed without having to fiddle with the antenna on our roof. We enjoy these conveniences, and the problem is, unless you're willing to give up the conveniences afforded by technology, you're also going to have to give up, at least to a certain extent, some of your privacy. The problem is we're giving up far more of our privacy than is technologically needed to provide the services that we enjoy. That's what I'm trying to change that with email, but that's only one small portion of how we communicate over the internet.
Nick? Last recommendations.
That's a tough one. I'm at a loss for words. I'm sorry.
Okay. So we have some websites you can sign up for their products. I think there was a Kickstarter campaign. Is that over now, Ladar?
Yes, it is, and
Okay.
I realized that when the Kickstarter ended, people could no longer support the effort. So we've been having to live off of what we raised during that initial fundraising drive. But if anybody does want to support the development effort for Darkmail, there are donation links on lavabit.com.
And Nick, do you have one as well?
Yeah, well, I'm not doing Kickstarter right now, but we are doing a fundraising membership drive at our table down in the vending area in the mezzanine. And we actually have some interesting technology that we're offering people as a benefit of membership.
And Ladar, there's a radio show.
Yeah, if anybody has a question they didn't have time to answer, we'll be appearing on Radio Statler at 2 p.m. You're welcome to, I guess, stop by their sound booth or call in and ask your question then.
Okay, we'll give these folks a round of applause. And Marcia, our impromptu guest speaker.
Dan, you know you got 2 hours, right? Or 2 hours minus about 10 minutes. So we'll try to give countdowns. If you get questions, make sure they come to the mic.
Or we'll
And if they
repeat 'em as
don't,
well.
repeat 'em. You got it. You've been here before.
On it.
All right. Hello, hello, hello. Here we are. Noon session. Hope X. It's the 10th Hope, and it is the 20th year, and we're having a fantastic time, aren't we? Yes, we are. Welcome. Good crowd. I would say we're not expecting the fire marshal today, but those sound like they could be famous last words. So we are still going to keep, because this is a crowded session, still please keep the aisles clear. There's red tape. I know a lot of you heard this over the last couple of days. And then those of you in Pentop Center, we want to also keep that aisle clear. We're sort of standing on one side, sitting on the other side. You don't have to be totally organized, but it's nice to keep aisles clear as people go in and out. So let me just give you a couple of quick announcements. One is, I know you're here for this, and I'm not urging you to go someplace else, but there is a fourth track, the U track session going on. It's starting now, but it's going to go till around 1:30. So if you want to dip in, dip out, and see what's going on over there, it's a dueling, I don't know if dueling is the right word. It's basically Ukraine and North Korea in the same room talking about some of the cultural hacker issues going on in those two countries. That's going to be pretty cool. That's in the U track. We'll have a couple other things coming up during the day. And the last thing I want to mention, announcement-wise, is please do remove your trash. So if you brought something in and you drank it, ate it, did some other thing to it that turned it into something you no longer want, please just go ahead and put it back in that bin. Oh, do we have a drinking game going on in the front row here already? Or is this the same drinking game from last night that's still going on? It's the same one, okay. Okay, we'll give them a sec to get their mic set. I just want to give you those few announcements, and hope you're having a super day here at Sunday.
No, we're leaving them on. No, we're leaving them on. Sorry, this is miscommunication city. We are fine this way. This is more than fine. This is fine. I think we're ready, yeah.
Looks like we're ready. Okay, so I checked. I checked, and it's safe to say, do not do this at Hope. Do it. You got an elevator at home? Do it at home. That's okay. You got one at work? Don't blame me, but I'm not going to say don't do it there either. But please don't do it at Hope, at least during the next 8 or 10 hours we have in the hotel. So we're pretty excited about this. Howard and Deviant are going to talk about elevator hacking for the next 2 hours.
All right, we should have some slides probably, right? There they are. So yeah, this is the elevator hacking talk. This is the talk that we were told had to be on Sunday because reasons. So who are we and why are we the ones up here talking to you about this? Some of you have seen me before. I'm Deviant. I own a pen testing firm that focuses mostly on physical side, so breaking into buildings, stealing stuff, getting back out again. I have used and leveraged elevators in that line of work a whole lot, and it's really funny. Howard?
Hi, everybody. I'm Howard. I'm an elevator consultant, former inspector. I'm not a member of either of the two fantastic local unions that New York City has. I'm frequently found in Atlantic City and Las Vegas in the casinos, and my favorite beer is cheap beer.
Right on. And are you here representing any particular employer today?
The standard disclaimer applies. The views and opinions expressed herein do not represent those of my employer, and I am not here representing Payne Elevator despite the name.
All right. One other caveat. This is serious fucking stuff.
So most of you probably ride elevators every day if you're from New York City, and most of those trips happen without incident. It's very rare for a passenger to be injured by an elevator, but it can happen. Most of the injuries that occur in this field are people like me that are working either on the car top, in the hoistway, or the motor room, or the pit.
Yeah.
Now, industrial accidents aside, elevators are generally safe, and we don't want to give people the impression that that's not the case. So, with that being said, though, if you're messing with them, there are various failure modes that can result in grievous bodily harm. In this case, you might notice there is a leg in the 1-inch gap between the car sill and the landing sill. Yeah. Amazingly, this leg was saved.
Yeah.
And of course, another disclaimer for everybody here, the introduction we got said it pretty adequately, but please leave the hotel pen alone. And they do have cameras in all the elevators, as you're probably aware. So
All being monitored by the NSA. Yeah, just because you think you're smart enough to be like, well, I'm no dumbass. I'm not going to die. I'll just fool around a little bit. It'll be okay.
right, what's wrong with a little harmless fun, right?
Yeah. We should have volume on the laptop. Do we have volume on that laptop soundboard? So like that's funny, right? That's, you know, the helicopter trick.
The escalator helicopter on YouTube.
So, you know, one kid did it right. Somebody else, maybe not so much.
Hey, it looks fun, right? It's all fun and games until you wind up with a felony criminal mischief charge. Caused thousands of dollars in damage.
Yeah, so just because you think this is funny and you saw it and you learned a little bit, you're not a fucking professional. We are. Well, he is. I stayed at Holiday Inn Express last night, but he is. This is his jam. He's trained for this. What you're about to see, some of this is stuff that looks fun, but you really, even if you've heard stories of people doing it, you probably shouldn't. Trust us, please. So, a little introduction to elevator tech. Because a lot of you might be kind of the train spotter type who's very interested in how certain systems are and how they work. You might not be aware that elevators, even though we ride them all the time, there's a lot of variety on the back end, but you can fundamentally think of them as coming in two flavors. Elevators are either overhead traction, where they're hoisted by cables, the industry would call them ropes, or they are driven from below by a hydraulic piston. So you have traction elevators and hydro elevators. And there's a lot of breakdown beyond that. There's, you know, geared and gearless, there's pitless, holeless. There's a lot of things in the slides that are in the wiki that are not in our slides. If you really want to get into the deep terms, we put it all in there. But just understand that's what you're talking about. You're talking about elevators that go up and down, and they drive themselves by means of either an overhead traction or by means of something in the pit pushing up. Now, what gets interesting about this, however, is people think that the elevator is really, it's a fixed machine. You're in this room and it must be hoisted on all sides and it's all affixed and okay, and this is driving up and it's really anchored in there. This is what is actually just moving the cab positionally. This is actually not moving the cab. This is what is guiding the cab in the hoistway. Elevator cabs, again, look at the slides that are going to be on the wiki for more details. The elevator cab is just guided gently by two rails. Rails and rollers on the sides are guiding this cab up and down the hoistway. It's not anchored in all four corners. The actual car sling itself is really minor. It's not a complicated machine. You're interacting with something that is just drifting up and down very lightly. And in this hoistway, it's simply stabilized by some rails. Where you usually interact with something that Howard is going to talk about. And yeah, okay, there you go.
So this is my elevator. And
brought it from home.
Yeah. So what you're looking at here are what we'd call fixtures. On the left side of the slide, this is the primary means of a user interacting and giving instructions as far as what destination they want to go to. That's called the car operating panel, or sometimes the COP. And when you push that button for floor 1, 2, or 3, you're registering what's called a cab call. That's as opposed to when you're in the hallway, you push up or down, and that's called a hall call. There's also position indicators, both traveling with the car, that tell you what floor you're at, what direction it's going, and in the hallway to let you know, if you're about to get on an elevator that's going in the wrong direction. Please don't do that.
Yeah. So again, when the elevator is driving you up or down based on the instructions you've given it, that's happening from the motor room itself. The elevator machine that you're riding in, the car, doesn't have its own power. That's being provided from the pit or the penthouse. Overhead traction elevators, you've got a nice motor room all the way on the top. It's called the penthouse. Here we have beautiful, gearless traction machines. Who makes these?
I believe that was Westinghouse.
Yeah, beautiful Westinghouse setup. If you have a hydro system, if you're being driven down from the pit, motor room's not nearly as sexy. Motor room and machine room, interchangeable terms, by the way. Hydro machine room, you're looking at a hydro tank and a pump system and a little controller on the wall. Because space is really at a premium in so many buildings nowadays, they have made machine rooms smaller and smaller. They even do make something called like a machine roomless elevator. What is it? Well, it's a hydraulic elevator that has the pump system in the pit, also known as, why does my hoistway smell like burning hydro fluid?
So the controller in the motorroom is basically the brain of the entire system. All of the fixtures and sensors that are part of the elevator system, and even the motor, of course, are tied back to this controller, which essentially is taking all of these inputs and making decisions and driving these different outputs, like the motor that actually provides the hoisting, the motor for the door that's opening and closing, pretty much everything that the elevator is doing.
Yeah. This is what is controlling your direction of travel. This is what is choosing how to operate. This is what is deciding whether your call is a valid call or not, or whether you're going to bypass some security or not. And they're not all, I mean, this is kind of a newer setup. They can be pretty old, right? What are these people about to see on the next slide? This is going to trip out some of the old heads in the room. Yeah.
Slide. This is a number 5 crossbar. No, I'm just kidding. This is actually an elevator controller. This is made by Otis. I believe it's a UAL controller. Basically, what you're looking at is an electromechanical decision-making machine that's just using a series of relays to decide where it wants to go and what it wants to do. And for decades, this is how all elevators were built. This is a device called the selector. What you're actually seeing is that as the elevator is moving up and down, it's actually spinning those plates and it's making contact with various little copper contacts that are telling the elevator controller where the elevator is.
Yeah, and this is not just something in a history museum. Like, there are still installs to this day that use relay logic.
This particular controller was still in use in 2014.
In where? Manhattan?
In Manhattan.
Yeah. If you've ever, like, maybe done some urban exploring, how many of you have ever been up on maybe a high level of a building and you've loudly heard, maybe through a wall, relays clacking on and off? That you're not hearing a traffic light box up there. You're hearing the elevator controller in that building. Now, some other interesting inputs that the controller gets.
So earlier you saw a selector that was spinning around mechanically and making contact. There are obviously solid state versions of that as well. In this case, what you're seeing is there is a little silver doodad that's mounted on top of the car, and it is fixed there and it travels up and down as the car travels up and down. Now there's also that black tape that's behind it. That runs from the top of the hoistway to the bottom of the hoistway. And on that tape, there will be magnets mounted. So there will be a solid-state magnetic sensor that's actually detecting when it's in line with those magnets. That allows it to send a message to the elevator controller saying, I'm level with the floor, or I'm approaching the floor, things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. So if it ain't broke, fix it. What is the industry considering?
Of course, now there are apparently QR code-based selector systems.
Yeah. Because a hoistway is so nice and clean, that would never get crudded up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there are also more primitive forms of this that still exist on modern systems. What you're looking at here are called limit switches. These generally exist only at the top and the bottom of the hoistway in modern elevators. And if you notice that there are actually 4 of them, the bottom 2 are called slowdowns. The third one up is the normal limit, and the top one is the final limit. What happens is, as this elevator is approaching the top floor, it will trip the first slowdown, it'll trip the second slowdown, and then it'll trip the normal limit. Obviously, as you might guess, that's telling the elevator controller, hey, it's time to slow down, you're approaching the end of your run. And then finally, when you hit the normal limit, that's where you should stop for a nice, safe, level landing. So you might be wondering, well, why is there a final limit? Well,
if you shoot past that normal limit because something goes wrong,
right,
elevator's unhappy.
Exactly. So that's as the name implies, again, it's the final switch that is there to indicate there is absolutely nowhere else for this elevator to run.
Yeah, you're going to crash in the ceiling. Jam on brakes now.
So another thing to keep in mind also is that if you ever happen to find out this happens in your building, if the elevator is on the finals, you pretty much need an elevator mechanic to come reset it.
Yeah, we witnessed one in a mall somewhere, and like even I hadn't fully learned all this yet. We're walking around, and Howard's like, "Oh, what do you think happened here?" And he's like on his radio listening to the mall security. They're like, broken elevator. I'm like, wow, that thing, it's not platformed right. It's like, it's way too high. He's like, yeah, it's sitting on its finals. They have to send out a proper tech. You'll see later in the slides who they sent out. It was not a proper tech. But this is all part of the elevator safety system. I mean, in general, we love allaying fears. A lot of people, you know, there's this, oh man, I don't know about elevators. Are they kind of dodgy? I'm scared. You should never really be afraid in an elevator. I mean, I guess if you're super claustrophobic, yes, it's a small box. But mechanically, elevators are really safe machines. Due mostly to pioneering advances here in America, go, you know, America. Our engineers and all of our systems, we've evolved the elevator industry a lot, and safety mechanisms work really robustly and reliably. Your classic governor setup, you have a Hollister Whitney governor here on the left. The idea of a separate set of ropes that are traveling with the car at all times, just monitoring the speed, monitoring how it's going, and they will engage braking systems if the elevator is traveling incorrectly. The Hollister-Whitney governor that you're seeing there can fire and trip and actually jam itself locked if the elevator starts speeding down. It can trip electrically. It even has a mechanical flyball type system where the centrifugal force, boom, it'll jam mechanically. What do those roping systems do? You'll see in the next slide. And there's another governor you can talk about, also HW on the side, right?
Yeah, the device on the right is a newer form of safety. The governor prevents a free fall. Most people have a fear that the elevator is just going to drop, right? But actually, the fear should be that the elevator falls up, because what's happening is typically the counterweight that the elevator is attached to weighs more than the cab and its occupants. So if for some reason all hell broke loose and the elevator was moving uncontrollably, chances are it was going to move up, not down. And actually, there was a case in Chile, I think it was.
Yeah, yeah.
There was like a viral
saw that on
video
YouTube?
where the elevator just rushes up out of control and it crashes into the overhead. That's exactly what happened. So the device on the right is called a rope gripper, and it's intended to prevent that.
Yeah. So elevator safety systems have been growing and evolving ever since Elijah Graves Otis created the first rail gripper mechanism. And you're seeing this demonstrated here in this non-American, very British TV show, which you can tell not just because of the gentleman's teeth, but because of the fact that he is being raised up a not insubstantial amount on this elevator, and then they just kind of saunter over a workman to chop the line. But because of the positive force on the rail gripper, you're going to see the same demo that Elijah Otis used to do at various fairs. And they say, all right, this is going to work the right way, isn't it? Okay, I hope so. But sure enough, clunk, click, and then you just don't fall. And that's what Elijah Graves Otis would do, and he would famously shout down to the crowd, all safe, fellas, you know. And this kind of idea, the idea of positive lock mechanisms, interlocks to prevent free fall, are how most elevators are built. We talked about the governor roping system. This is a side view of a hoistway. You can see the rail and the roller on the side. This roping setup, that's the governor rope. And again, we already told you they're not ropes. They're not running on like hemp fiber. These are cables.
They used to.
They used to, yeah. Hemp is strong, man. You've had the wool pulled over your eyes. So yeah, this is the governor roping setup. And imagine that's traveling with the car. You can see the little swaging tool that's locked up there. Now, if the governor trips and jams shut, that rope will yank and actually pull on the safety mechanism. And they're all different styles of safety mechanism, but they're all doing the same thing. They're firing, they're jamming, you have wind-up safeties. There's a number of them, but their whole deal is stop this car from plummeting. And if all else fails, you should still understand that there are additional mechanisms down in the pit. Whether you're talking about hydros or overheads, these are all pictures of pit buffers. And if you've ever seen, because maybe you were exploring somewhere you shouldn't, the pit of an elevator system, you may have seen the spring buffer or the oil buffers down there. Some people just assume, they're like, oh, so when like the elevator is done its travel, it's probably sitting on that, waiting at the bottom of the hoistway. No, the elevator's never supposed to touch this except during, special tests that he can run. This is there just to absorb the full weight of the elevator at full rated travel speed. And they're completely going to survive that. You're going to see maybe some footage of that later too.
If you're in an elevator when that happens, you may be grievously injured, but you probably won't die.
Yeah. Elevators want to keep you alive, and elevators do their job really well. If an elevator's running on automatic mode, you're going to be okay, right?
Generally speaking.
Yeah. What's the one type of thing you should not do when the elevator's on automatic mode?
Mess with it in general.
You shouldn't ride the car top. Yeah.
I've done it before.
This is actual surveillance footage.
This is it.
Yeah.
It's good fun.
Genuine documentary footage.
Come on. Turn that light on. That's it. Oh, this is brilliant. I can't believe it.
And again, they're not in control of this elevator. They're just riding it, but someone else is driving it on automatic. Yeah, like, don't be that guy.
In all seriousness, this has happened. It's not just TV drama. There are actual cases where people working on the car tops have been fatally injured that way.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're smart, right? You understand this is fun stuff. It can be dangerous. Don't be like derp faces, right? So we talked about automatic mode is very safe. Who is interested in finding out stuff that's not automatic mode?
I think we have some people
we
in the
have some
audience
hands.
that would like to see that.
So there's a lot of other special modes. Many of them apply to the work that I do. Independent service mode. Far and away one of the most useful things you can do with an elevator if you want to run it in a way that's not perhaps the standard. Independent service mode is something that will take the elevator out of the bank of normal operation. It is your elevator for as long as you're in the cab. If I flip an elevator to independent service mode, and let's say I'm in a data center and I can't get up to like floors 8, 9, and 10 because I don't have a badge or whatever reason, independent service mode gets me up to that floor usually. Yes. Let's say, however, that I'm not trying to get to any, like all the floors are accessible, I just don't want to be found by security. So as Babak and I can tell you stories, there's been plenty of times we've just like hid in disused offices, I've hid in a janitor's closet. The nicest place I've ever hid was in a fucking elevator. Because if you flip independent service mode, not only do you drive it wherever you want, but it ignores all the hall calls. So if you're in a big building with like 10 elevators, no one's going to notice, hey, how come elevator 7 hasn't been responding all day? No, they're just getting on whatever one shows up. I sat in an elevator for 4 hours with a nice little outlet and light, and I could plug my phone in and just hang out till the office workday was done. Then I drove it back down to the lobby and let him in. Yeah, like... So sometimes those are key switch operated, sometimes those are toggle switch operated. There's a lot of things we'll tell you about little hidden panels, but independent mode far and away is what most people go for right away when they're trying to do funny things. That's not at all the only mode, right?
Now, independent. Mic check.
Check, check.
Sure. So independent mode should not be confused with attendant mode. Attendant operation is very similar to independent, but they are in fact different. It harkens back to the days when there was actually a dude or a woman in the elevator that would run the cab and pick up passengers, manually control the elevator. And what they would actually have is usually a crank like this in a really old elevator, but in a more contemporary elevator you might see something like this. So what this actually is, it's behind a lock panel. If the attendant has the key, they put it on attendant service, and these controls allow the attendant to make decisions about how to proceed picking up the calls. So for example, if it's the Hotel Penn and there was an attendant and a ton of people get on at one floor with a bunch of bags and the elevator is full, they might say, you know, we should reverse direction and just bring these people down to the lobby because it's full. There's no one else who's going to get in here, right? Or maybe there's a VIP or an emergency or something like that. So the up and down buttons allow the attendant to say, it's time to reverse direction. The bypass button, sometimes the non-stop button, what that actually does is allows the attendant to make the decision to skip the hall calls. It doesn't clear the hall calls, it doesn't ignore them, it just temporarily skips them until the duration of this particular ride is over, and then it'll continue to collect those calls as it resumes normal operation.
Yeah, but it's expensive to have an attendant. It's expensive to like hire an attendant, and if you have various priority needs for your elevators, what if you want, here you can use that one, what if you want to not have an attendant standing in the elevator anymore, but you still want to, let's say, prioritize some big shot or bigwig? Well, tell them a little bit about executive mode.
Sure. So executive and express priority service, as the name implies, are various priority modes that allow an authorized person to register a call that the elevator controller will give priority to over normal plebeians. Basically, what it does is if a person has a key, they might have a special key switch at the hall station where they'd register an up or down call. And when they insert the key and turn it, it tells the elevator controller, this person here is more important than any other call that you have. Service it as fast as possible. The basic difference between express service and executive service is that one will reverse direction of the cab and dump people out. The other one will just continue in the same direction. Now,
when he says dump people out, he means that.
Yeah, Otis in particular has a voice announce system that will actually say, this car is needed for some other purpose. Please exit at the next floor.
Yeah, so yeah, you are not important, you can leave. How about one, this is one that some people might find obscure, but there's actually a lot of elevators in the greater New York region that run on Sabbath mode. If you haven't actually been in one, you might have seen like Religulous, where they talk about the Shabbat elevator, the Sabbath elevator. If you're not familiar with certain Orthodox religious practices where people aren't allowed to interact with any buttons or switches, This is a mode that was created, kind of just made up by elevator controllers and elevator programmers. And they said, well, maybe we can give some people the ability to not, walk all the way up the stairs. Tell them what actually happens on the Sabbath in some of these elevators.
In most cases, the elevator will go to the lowest landing, pick up its passengers, presumably it's the lobby. It will then proceed to the top floor.
All the way up.
And then stop at every single floor on the way down without any interaction from the user.
Yeah, giving you the opportunity to get off on your floor. And in a really high building, sometimes they'll skip, every other floor. But that's the idea. That's the idea that, oh my gosh, I don't have to push any buttons. I can still get where I'm going. It's an interesting kind of end run around the man upstairs. Let's talk about a feature that is not also very common, but damn it should be, and you would be wishing for it maybe if you were at a conference like this one. He said ventilation is what Marpat said, yeah.
Ask us later about the air conditioners for elevators.
Yeah. Or even just the story. You'll tell stories in the Q&A about the fan during inspections.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. But no, what we're talking about is load bypass. Oh my freaking God. Elevators have load sensors. If you've ever been in an elevator that was like angry, it was beeping at you, oh my God, this car is overweight. How many people have ever had that happen? Because you're all fat hackers like me, right? Yeah. No, I mean, elevators, they know how, if they're too heavy, they can program additional features in so the elevator can say, I've picked up a few, hall calls here, I've platformed, I am at capacity. It is stupid if I keep stopping on every floor on the way down, opening my doors with people just staring at a full car, and it'll just prioritize straight down. Why the hell this is not enabled more often boggles my mind. If you're a building owner, hire an elevator service tech who can optimize your shit, and this will get people moving around the building faster.
I think it comes down to money.
You can also enable this while you're at it. Anti-nuisance mode, or no passenger detection. If somebody presses too many buttons in rapid succession, or if an elevator platforms at a number of floors answering calls that have been put in, and the safety edge detects nobody getting on or off, elevators can be programmed to say, well, somebody was being a jackwagon, and I should just dump all these calls and get the hell where I was going. We accidentally found this in, I guess this was a ShakaCon. We were kind of drunk, and we go, oh wow, look at that, that's kind of funny. And we just kept slamming buttons, seeing how many we could press. And you'll notice if you press buttons too quickly, they'll start to decide just to dump out all the calls. That's anti-nuisance mode.
It's like they know we're here.
But most of all, I mean, most optimization or extra, efficiency, mostly all you're seeing is people talking about peak performance. Occasionally, especially in office buildings and hotels, you'll have peak demand, and they know what times of day people are trying to get up or trying to get down.
Right, so at a hotel environment, obviously more people are going to be checking in the evening and checking out in the morning. And in an office environment, they'll be arriving in the morning and leaving in the evening. So in terms of optimization, if you were to hire somebody like me to come and try and optimize your elevators, what we would generally do is model your building in highly sophisticated software. Now, you think I'm kidding, but actually it turns out that Maxis did not really design this from the ground up. They actually found some guy in Japan that was working on a serious building simulator to model elevators. And that was the evolution of Sim Tower.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, it's actually frighteningly accurate. If you want to talk about Sim Tower, I'd love to.
Yeah, you can what did you tell me about the motor room in Sim Tower?
Oh yeah, if you double click the motor room, it gives you all kinds of programming options for the elevator. You can program it for different times of day and peak operation and all kinds of things.
Yeah. Something that doesn't apply here as much as maybe our folk who are out in the West Coast.
Sure. Well, actually, it does apply here, believe it or not. Yeah.
We're in what, Region 1 here, I guess?
Zone 2.
Zone 2.
So basically, by code, elevators will be grouped into 3 different seismic categories depending on where they're located. So there's, for example, seismically stable regions, and then there's Southern California. So when you're in a seismically active region, because the elevator is obviously a moving object and Newtonian motion and all that fun stuff, if the building starts to sway, right, equal and opposite reaction, the elevator is going to start to move too. If the elevator is moving a little bit too much, there will be sensors. Sometimes it's just a little ring on a string that's traveling up and down, and if the ring makes contact with the string, it completes a circuit, things like that. And if that happens, it tells the elevator controller, all hell is breaking loose, you better get these people off this elevator immediately. Now, what's interesting about seismic mode is that unlike some of the other emergency modes we're going to talk about in a second, seismic mode can actually move you up. So most people would think, well, why would an elevator bring me up in a building when an earthquake is happening? And the reason is actually that because the counterweight is also part of this mechanical system, the idea is to move the cab away from the counterweight whenever possible, so that if for whatever reason, if the counterweight would manage to break free from the rails, you don't have this, massive 2,500-pound weight swinging around
the hoistway.
slamming into the car.
Yeah. But perhaps, when he told me about that, I was blown away. I was like, oh my God, that's like the craziest piece that's amazing, tech mode. That's got to be one of the wildest things. Imagine hell breaking loose like that. Well, there's another hell breaking loose, right?
Sure. Instead of seismic unrest, there's also civic unrest, right? So, riot mode, in a nutshell, is designed to allow building owners, who of course own the means of production, to keep the proletariats from ransacking their fortresses of solitude in an event of civic unrest. So let's just say, let the rowdy Occupy movement was outside throwing bricks through windows and whatnot. What this mode does is basically locks out the lobby or other designated floors that might have access from the ground level. The idea being that the occupants of the building can actually still travel around inside the building undisturbed.
Yeah, just like swirling their brandy, being nose in the air. Be like, I heard the ruffians are very Twitter out there. Now, you may have probably never experienced riot mode. You may have seen or experienced, even depending on how your health has been, code blue mode. Has anybody ever seen, medical emergency service in a building? Maybe you work in a hospital or something. Medical emergency or code blue mode, it's very similar to that VIP priority service. The idea being, if you are a doctor or someone in care with someone who has a life-threatening condition, you can seize one elevator out of the bank. The controller will prioritize immediately, even more so than with a VIP. It'll prioritize the absolute closest car, flip direction if necessary, make that announcement that says, this car is needed, you're not important, please get out. And then a doctor will wheel that gurney in and, get someone up to obstetrics or get someone to the ICU or what have you. Another thing about hospitals and other medical modes, there's code blue, there's also code pink. Does anybody, not that code pink, does anybody want to guess? Is my color shifted way off? I don't know. That should be very pink. Somebody had guessed it, yes. Now, code pink is baby theft mode. If you're not familiar with the security related to maternity wards in hospitals, the security of actually like the little baby LoJack, they have all these interesting response procedures that happen in a building when a baby is moved in an unauthorized way. And some of those involve automatic door locks, some of those emergency alerts that go out over the PA. The elevators in a lot of big hospitals are part of the security operation. The elevators will behave in what is known as security recall mode. Security recall mode, which doesn't exclusively exist in hospitals, you can have big buildings that can manually trigger it if necessary. Security recall basically turns the elevator into a man trap. You can forcibly take control away from whoever's in the cab and deliver that passenger and any other occupants to a floor of your designation, the designated security recall floor, usually right by the desk, and then optionally either keep the doors shut and not let the person get out under any means, or forcibly cycle the doors, giving them no place to hide themselves while a bunch of people are standing there with guns saying, "Get out of my building, what are you doing here?" So that's security recall mode. Not to be confused with security service, which is a catch-all term. A lot of times you'll see key switches that don't seem to make a lot of, oh, what is this? Security, priority, whatever. Like this one, I was walking around a hotel and I said, okay, well, what do you see about these three key switches? We've got our light and fan, our inspection service, and we've got security service. And I showed this to some tool people last night, and one of them said, well, one of them is keyed very differently, right? The keyway is different. And I said, you'd think it's different. It's actually all the same keyway. One of them has just been beat to hell. So I walk by the front desk and I'm like, hey, you seem pretty cool. I've been rapping with you every time I walk by. You're a nice guy. Just tell me, I do a lot of work with elevators. What's up with the security service that you apparently are using 20 times a day? Like, are you having security incidents all the time? And he's like, no, the maids use that to go to the basement. We just turn that on and disable the lockouts. So just because you think you see something you understand, it might not be doing what you expect it to do. And what a lot of people don't know what they expect it to do is the big one, fire service.
So, in the lobby of pretty much every building built in the 1980s and later, you're going to see a key switch just like this at the lobby or some other designated landing. In super tall buildings, they'll have sky lobbies that'll have their own switches in those lobbies. And what this basically is, it allows a firefighter to manually put an elevator on fire recall mode. So you've probably seen signs near the elevator that say, do not use elevator in the event of a fire, use the stairs, right? And no unaccompanied children, something like that here.
Yeah, apparently that's the rule here with
So
your elevators.
the point being, though, that elevators do have ways of detecting when the building's on fire, sort of. The landings, the area immediately around where the elevators open up, will have a smoke and a heat detector usually. That will be tied back through the alarm system into the elevator, usually by use of dry contacts. What will happen is, if there's a fire or smoke condition that's in front of one of these landings, the elevator controller knows that there's an emergency, and it takes the elevators out of automatic operation and brings them down to that designated landing where those key switches are. The point being that passengers should not be allowed to operate the elevator when a fire is happening. There's tons of cases of this where somebody ends up in an elevator during a fire situation and the doors open to a floor that's on fire, and it's obviously not a pleasant end. So
That's fire service mode 1.
phase 1 is
Yeah.
what we'd call it. So the thing is, if the fire is not at the landing, the elevator might not be in phase 1 by the time the firefighters get there. So they have the key that they can insert into that key switch and turn it to on. When they turn it to on, it'll manually bring all of the elevators
It
down to that.
forces phase 1.
Right, exactly. It'll bring all the elevators in that bank down to the floor, lock them out, clear all the hall calls, passengers can't ride it, passengers can't call it, et cetera, et cetera. The difference between these two key switches is that one is at the landing, that's the one on the left, and one is in the cab, that's the one on the right. The one on the right is what's called phase 2 operation. This allows the firefighter to then go inside the cab, flip that key switch, and although the elevator thinks the building's on fire, it'll still run and allow the firefighter to do what they need to do.
It's saying someone authorized is in this one particular cab who knows what they're doing, surely is a firefighter, not at all a pen tester. And I should take all the calls this person is giving me, and I should take all the instruction that I should be told to do. Now, if you are not trained in fire service mode, the elevator is not behaving the way you think it will behave. You will possibly get yourself stuck in the elevator. You'll possibly not drive it the way you think you can. Please don't screw around with this, even though we've done it a lot.
So as far as the operation of fire mode, phase 2 versus automatic operation, one thing to keep in mind is that because it's an urgent emergency situation, usually when there's a fire, firefighters essentially are allowed to override all the security that's inside these systems. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. But you might be thinking, okay, so you're disabling all these systems.
Yeah.
What could possibly ever override fire service?
Who could be more important in the elevator world than a fire person? Elevator inspector.
So it's not like some sinister thing where we just are all egomaniacs. But the idea is actually, yeah, it is. The idea is that if there is somebody that's on the car top, hopefully they are properly trained. And if there was an emergency situation, when they find that out, they will want to be the first ones out, I assure you. So the idea being that generally they're trained, they know how to react to the situation, and they will want to get the hell out of there.
Yeah, if you're running hoistway inspection mode, if you're operating in the hoistway, you know it's the most dangerous place to be.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
To clarify again, it's because the hoistway is an extremely dangerous place. It's not going to just automatically move the cab when someone's up there working.
Yeah. And what you might find out later, and we're not going to answer too many questions about, there's a whole bunch of auxiliary controls that you can drive and run the car from in the hoistway outside of the car itself. We're not going to tell them about that, though.
No.
What you need to realize is that this is an industry where if you're not from the industry, again, we keep kind of hitting this, you might not think something is working the way it's working. This was my favorite story when he started teaching me about all the different switching mechanisms, and I was like, oh, look at that, a shutdown switch. That's kind of funny. I guess like you could take them out of service for, I don't know why, like you got to save power because you're a greener building initiative, but you know, what if there's a switch that says shut down and on, which position has the elevator shut down and which one has it running? Break it down for him.
Yeah, so in this case, to shut down the elevator, you turn shutdown to on.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're not from this industry, like ask us questions about why things aren't working the way they're supposed to work. Let's talk about some things that should work certain ways and then don't. Who would like to understand more about elevator security? And then we're going to piss all over it. Simple elevator security, things like denying users the ability to make hall calls, right? So there are a couple of different ways of doing that. Talk to them about that.
Sure. So what you're seeing on the left is a newer cutout, as it's called. What it basically is just a key switch that's wired in series usually that allows somebody with a key to complete the circuit by turning the key and then pushing the button. You're seeing the same thing on the right. It's just an older setup. Again, basically, it's generally very straightforward. It's usually just a simple key switch that's completing a circuit. Nothing really too complicated going on in there. Occasionally, you'll see serialization on like really super large jobs, but it's definitely the exception to the rule.
But yeah, the idea of, has anyone ever been in a building where you couldn't register a call the normal way? Like maybe I found this button and I was like, oh, it must be an elevator, push button. No, it's a light. The only way to register and latch a call was to use my room key. And then that made the call. But of course, what is right below that light? Fire service mode. Yeah. That's very common though, the idea of denying people the ability to make hall calls. Denying people the ability to make floor calls from the elevator with cutout locks, right?
Sure, absolutely. It's exactly analogous to locking out people from making hall calls. The idea being that inside the cab, there's a key switch that interacts with the button to prevent somebody from using it. Now yeah. This is not actually wired in series the way that something in the hall.
A lot of people think it just breaks the circuit.
No.
No.
We'll get into that.
This is another cutout key. It might be a different key than the ones you saw, those little wafer locks. Does anyone tell me what kind of lock this is? Yeah, Medico. That floor 7 is way more interesting than the floors apparently in the other photograph there. Here's another instance of a Medico lock, right?
Yes.
But now something's different here, right?
Right. So in this case, there's no button, right? It's just the key switch. Not a good idea.
So why would that be not a good idea? What's different about this? They both have Medico locks. Why would one not be code compliant? Shout it out if you think you got an idea. Yeah, they got it.
Good audience.
Who cannot fuck around with a billion keys when they're trying to operate the elevator? Fire personnel. They need every floor to have a button that they can register a call to and not screw around with individual key switches. So all of this that you're about to see, these are all different ways that people try to secure an elevator. It's not really going to work. We're about to break it all down for you. Honestly,
I've seen one that worked.
Yeah, you found one interesting locking setup, whereas, here's a picture of a hall call button, and there's a big lock next to it. It's not locking the hall call. This is not a hall call cutout. No.
So, as you might guess, this is from a detention facility. Now, this is actually also not code compliant, although they were able to get a variance to be able to do this. Although it probably wasn't the greatest idea because somebody actually did end up getting injured as a result of that. So, with that being said, if you're trying to secure your elevator, this would be a great way to do it if you could. But I'm just going to go ahead and recommend vestibules and other forms of control around the elevator because as you're going to see from the next couple slides, there are a lot of different means.
Yeah, if you're not physically securing the elevator area, you might as well think of your elevator as an open stairwell. Everything that you just saw, all of those different security practices, let's take a giant dump on them. How about that? So, how about when there were no hall call buttons? How are you going to get the elevator to show up? Oh no, I have no hall call buttons, but I do have a piece of paper. Click. What just happened there? Let's just try that again for a second. Oh, there's no hall call buttons. Click. I'm going to get to class on time. You could probably figure out what happened. The elevator was platformed at that lower level. That was its recall level. So somebody just tripped the safety edge. They just stuck something in that broke the IR beam, and the elevator said, oh, I got to bounce my doors open here. Somebody's trying to get in.
That is not a universal trick. It just happened to work on that one elevator. But something to keep in mind. A lot of these tricks are like that.
No, it's totally smart to stick things through hoistway doors when you don't know what's beyond there, right? It's totally
safe.
He said
it, not me.
What most of what we're about to show you, though, I mean, that's just fun and hokey, but key switches. Key switches, key switches, key switches. Understanding the mechanical switching systems and understanding how to exploit them, how to get the right keys. This is what most of us do on a daily basis when we're trying to exploit elevator security. So there's a lot of different key switches, and there's a lot of different fixtures and brands that Howard's going to tell you about. And on jobs, an elevator tech will usually, all right, I've got to open this key box and get the keys for that job. Or you go to the building manager and say, oh, we're here to do your inspection. All right, give me the keys. In the industry, very few people really collect these keys or monitor these keys. They say, oh, this was the key for this job, and then they hand it back. Now, if you've explored around, you might find keys laying around and be like, oh, I got to check, I'm going to write this down, or I'm going to use this key. That's something that like urban explorers might do. What Howard's been doing for the past years and years and years in this industry is not just like finding and writing down keys, but logging systematically every single key he's ever found and every single key switch where it has worked. As far as I know, he's the only gentleman that's been maintaining a database of keys and a collection of keys with full knowledge of where to use them. Now, this was Howard's keys when I first met him. Would you like to see Howard's keys today? There's more of them.
It's actually even bigger now. And I
Kind
think
of puts into perspective those sets you can buy online.
yeah, I think I left one or two at home too.
So yeah, talk to him about why you need this many and what you're seeing on jobs.
The basic reason that there are so many different keys is because there are so many different manufacturers of elevator fixtures. I'm not going to get into all the details of this because I don't want to waste too much time on the differences between the fixtures, but what it really boils down to is that if you are attentive to what you're actually seeing, you'll start to notice patterns. So if you could go back one. Sure. This is something you can recognize very easily usually. This is the Otis chiclet, or the Series 1 fixtures. We call them chiclets because they look like little square chiclets, and they're very recognizable in that way. They're almost always keyed alike. So if you happen to notice that the elevator is using those fixtures, you also pretty much know what key it's using. And that applies not just to that particular line of Otis fixtures, but to newer Otis fixtures as well. There's a company called GAL Manufacturing in the Bronx. They are also generally keyed alike. Innovation Industries, another huge manufacturer of generic fixtures. Again,
yeah, these aren't elevator
alike.
brands. These are resellers of aftermarket parts.
Aftermarket parts, yeah.
And they're all keyed alike.
And again, I mean, we can do this all day. Adams is another a provider of parts. They key them alike.
I do this to him all the time. I send him photos from jobs, and I'm like, I'm in this building. I need to know what key this is. I really got to get up there. He's like, come on. It's a square button. It's not recessed. You know this. I'm like, no, I don't. Tell me what the hell this is. He's like, Schindler. I'm like, okay, fine. Security's coming. I got to get out of here. What's your answer invariably is always like, sometimes he'll text me before he's like, the email hasn't loaded yet. I'm on my phone. It's probably EPCO. Like, because everything's EPCO.
Yeah, EPCO is definitely a very popular one.
Now, when you see, like, when he rags on me all the time, right? Because he's like, you know this. What's the font? What is it? I'm like, I don't know, dude. Come on, tell me. But, like, if you actually compare, you might think, well, I mean, they're just round and they have a button and blah. But, like, look at them side by side. If you get into this, you'll start to learn how to distinguish. You'll start to learn various characteristics, and you can kind of, like, train spot them, just like he does. We'll give you one that's really easy. How many people have seen buttons like this before? You've been probably in like a low rise, a slow high, like hydraulic elevator, like a Holiday Inn or something like that, right? This is your classic low rise elevator system by Dover.
Yeah, Dover had this market cornered in like low rise hydraulic elevators for the longest time. Dover ended up getting purchased by a company called ThyssenKrupp. ThyssenKrupp now makes their own fixtures, but for a while they were still installing Dover fixtures.
But then this is great. Just
right.
like talk through this one.
Okay. So this is something.
We just had to show you this for a second.
This is something I saw once on vacation, actually. Obviously, it's a Dover elevator, right? Because it says Dover. And just take my word for it, that's a Dover position indicator. It's just another one of the many fixtures that if you start to recognize them after a while, you'll know who made it and where it originated and, again, how it's wired and all the fun stuff about how it works. But this is where it starts to break down. This is not a button. This is the firefighter's jewel. This indicates to a firefighter when the building is on fire and the elevator's on phase 1 and 2.
Not the stock one, though.
But it's weird because it certainly looks like a button from a distance. And if I had to guess, if you were paying attention to the other slide, it looks like an Adams Survivor Plus fixture. It's just weird. It doesn't really seem to jive with the rest of the panel. And this is also pretty weird. This is actually a ThyssenKrupp key switch on a Dover, again, on a Dover panel, but it's a Dover compatible ThyssenKrupp key switch. Stop me if this is getting weird. But they're making parts that obviously fit the systems that they used to make. It's just a newer model of it. Now, again, they've got Adams fixtures for the push buttons for most of these floors, except apparently not for 4 or M. For some reason, they didn't need to make those vandal resistant. And then they have EPCO Designer Line, I believe it's called, is the push bar right there that's custom engraved. But this is the one that drives me really nuts. The door open button has no light. The door close button has a light. So just to, I guess, let you know that it's ignoring you when you push door close.
Yeah. All of that shit on the internet, by the way, about the door close button hack, how many people know that's bullshit? How many people are convinced it's not and they swear it worked when they tried it? All right, good. Very good skeptics in the room.
How many people know that there is a sort of truth to it, but most people misunderstand it? All right.
What is your theory for why people probably started that rumor?
There's two things. The first is that on independent service, you have to hold the closed door button to close the door. That's how the elevator knows when to close the door. Somebody's running it and it says, okay, I'm ready to close the door. They hit the closed door button, the door's closed. So I think somebody somewhere probably saw somebody running a car in independent and they
Maybe
said,
nonstop or something.
yeah. And basically they said, well, he hit door close and the floor we were going to, and it went right there, which is pretty much independent service in a nutshell.
Right, no, but you weren't witnessing a hack. You were witnessing someone who had a key.
But there's also, though, another thing. The sort of half-truth to the elevator hack with the door close button is that on older relay logic controllers, because there was such a limited amount of different states that the elevator could really exist in logically, there could be weird sort of unexpected consequences of doing things like holding the door close button for the duration of your ride. There is at least one model of Otis controller, relay logic, that if you are holding the door close button, it will still try to collect every call on the way up or the way down.
It'll still stop.
It'll stop, it'll level, and it'll wait as though the doors are opening and closing. But if you're holding door closed, the doors simply stay closed.
So you're just kind of being a dick. You're not being faster. But this is the kind of stuff, if you get into, fixtures and identifying, you'll notice. Like, how many people ever used to build computers and swap out parts? And you could spot, be like, oh, when did you put a new CD drive in your computer? The beige isn't quite the same color, These two hall call buttons, most people wouldn't even notice, except an elevator guy instantly walks by and goes, oh, wow, they clearly swapped out this one.
I'm super OCD, and this drove me nuts when I saw it. The one on the bottom is Helvetica. The one on top is a font called Gordon. There's a whole history to it.
But talk to this guy and buy him drinks. He'll talk about this all night.
The point being, though, actually what happened here is this was in an office building where there happened to be more down demand from this floor than up demand. So at some point, the arrow broke. The one on top, I can just tell, is the original one. Somebody broke it eventually, and the mechanic that came out was like, well, I need another push button, right? So they probably called up EPCO, and they said, hey, I need a down button. And they're like, well, which kind?
And people in the industry aren't all like him. They don't care.
And he was probably like, well, down.
So you get EPCO. But let's talk about something you should care about, and the industry should really care about more. And we're really shocked at how many people in this industry, or pseudo in this industry, are selling keys, and they're like bullshit sets of keys.
Sure. So, like I was saying, a lot of elevators are key to like, and there are some vendors that have taken advantage of this to various ends. It's primarily marketed towards firefighters and fire departments who have a need to have the keys on hand. So sometimes, even though there should be a Knox box or a key box somewhere in the building, or a building manager should have the keys, sometimes that's not always the case. In an emergency, there's no time to waste. The firefighters want their own sets of keys, right?
Yeah. So this set's popular. This is a $70 set. Get you 8 keys. Those doing the math, that's like a little under $9 a key. Does it come free with the smoke, though, right? Yeah.
The smoke is included in the package.
Yeah.
It ships to UPS ground.
There's another set that people sell for $200, 17 keys, a little bit more per key. But of course, you're getting more options, right? This is, a firefighter would really want this set because it's got so many options for them, right?
Right. Well, what I like about this one is that the vendor very, very courteously decided to take nice, straight-on photos of the keys.
Yeah. So if you were in Jos Vegas' talk, exactly. And Howard was able to look at those and instantly identify most of them, and he realizes what a useful set this is.
This set is probably one of the best values in the industry for fire departments, as long as your particular fire department serves a geographic area including Massachusetts, New Jersey, New Hampshire, New York, South Carolina, and Arizona.
Yeah, so if that's where your truck is rolling through the streets all the time, all together somehow, I guess this is the set for you. Go ahead and drop the $200.
So, realistically, what probably happened was somebody just kept handing the vendor keys and saying, I've seen this work for fire service on an elevator. And then they say, well,
yeah, add it to the ring. Now, the thing about that, when people are not really discriminating what they're putting on these key sets, and they're not even very sharp on how they're duplicating these keys, you'll get situations like this from some suppliers, where clearly one was a nice original machine code cut key and the other was just run on a duplicator and maybe a duplicate of a duplicate. So in the industry, thankfully, as we have learned, the key switches, a lot of them have really bad tolerances. So all these keys will kind of work. But if you are interested in getting proper keys that are made well, keys that are not just super sloppy, that's the difference between, buying them from, let's say, elevatorkeys.com versus just going on eBay and saying, oh, I need the 2839 key.
Yeah, and I can actually just tell you, definitely don't bother trying to order from that website. They will ID you and put you through endless verification processes.
Yeah. But we'll talk about something now that some people might say, well, I've seen these systems where, forget key switches, they're not even buttons. I've seen destination dispatch, it's called. How many have ever ridden an elevator like this? All right, so there's some around here, new modern idea. The idea being for super efficiency, you shouldn't tell passengers to select their floors, you should tell them to dictate, I want to go to 17, and it will tell you, oh, go to elevator A, go to elevator E, and the elevators will optimize those calls and collect them up. Well, in a destination dispatch system, if there's no control in the elevator, how does any of this work? What does every elevator have to have in its configuration package for emergencies? Fire mode. What's a fire person going to do? They're not going to bang on like a touch screen with giant gloves. No, there's almost always a hidden panel that you can key open with the fire keys in a destination dispatch elevator, and it will have the full bank of buttons. And as you learned, you don't even have to be on fire mode. Those are regular hall call buttons at that point.
Yeah, this was a kind of weird situation. When the panel was opened, it was demonstrated to me that even though the elevator was not actually on firefighter's operation, pushing that button once you had the lock panel open, allowed it to sort of operate like a traditional automatic elevator.
Yeah. But this is a very modern, futuristic kind of system, right? Let's forget about the future for a minute. This is still an industry really stuck in the past in a lot of ways. So when we meet with people, right, and you know a lot about physical security from me, and I've learned elevators from you. What did someone tell you when you were looking at the new key switch they were equipping?
Yeah, this is actually from a casino, and we had the pleasure of interfacing with the building's architect, who had an incredible amount of personal involvement with selecting elevator components. And this topic of security obviously came up because it's a casino. And I remember very distinctly when he was describing to me how he picked the lock cylinders. And his exact words were, no one could ever subvert our security because we use unpickable tubular locks.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, they think tubulars are the latest and greatest thing that ever came out. Somebody somewhere pushes Medico keys in some instances. I got a big collection of them through him. I laid them all out, and I said, well, that looks kind of funny. Baba, give me your screwdriver for a second. And I tightened it up on the screwdriver, and I said, oh, well, okay, first of all, what you got here is keys that are the same bitting and same cut for half the damn blade of the key. And the rest are all just part of a mastered system. What did you learn from Yost yesterday, and what did you learn from us if you ever talk about master keying? You can decode the top master key with a large enough sample data set. Not going to say we did, but, lol, we did. I got this photo from him from a restaurant one day. He's like, check it out. I'm like, wow, okay, you're on like a Dover job, right? Looks like a Dover impulse key. He's like, it is, but you won't believe where it is. So there's just a lot of key reuse. There's like, people think these are unique keys and they're getting them from a supplier, from a supplier, from a supplier. Your keys are not, Mouse is saying voting machines have this same situation. Somebody who's not building the lock, they're just ordering a part, is probably ordering a part that is not as unique as they think. Ask him downstairs or during the Q&A what NEMA 7, super destructo resistant, fixtures.
Explosion-proof
fixtures have to do with gumball machines, and he'll tell you a story. Here's another one, just kind of the behind the times thinking of the industry. This is the official instruction set from MCE, one of the elevator providers that does some Internet of Things, remote connectivity. And they very specifically say, create an Edge account and punch a hole in your firewall called MCE support. Make sure the password is MCE support. In fact, go ahead and take your admin password, change that to MCE support. Just make it all MCE support so that we can always get in. So this is the latest generation of product, by the way, from MCE, the IQ and the iView systems. This is what they are now moving to for the idea of remote management. We're just going to let this video play and see what some people might think is, would you want your elevators with all of this functionality being connected to the internet with the same password on an XP box? Yeah, Josh wants the badges on the same system. We could probably, they probably make a module for that, yeah.
The good news is, although this was installed in 2014, I believe they paid for the extended XP support.
Yeah. How many people were at the social engineering talk? Very, very groovy. How many people are going to laugh at this?
As your building's requirements change, you can customize your elevator's operation to fit your specific needs with a simple telephone call to our elite engineers.
Elite.
To reserve one of our elevators?
It won't be a problem. I'm going to take elevator number 2 from the bank, and I'll reserve it for your move.
You can restrict service to a floor under renovation in a hotel.
I've got it reserved.
Or place a car on independent service to use it for moving furniture or for the exclusive use of a VIP. It can all be done with a single phone call.
Indeed.
Yeah. So you can call up and say, oh yeah, I need elevator 10 to be on independent service. And there's supposedly, a little owner card that has your credentials on it, which nobody could ever possibly bluff their way through and say, oh no, I don't have the card in front of me, but the VIP's coming right away. You got to do this for me, man.
Yeah, I'm paying for elite service.
It's the OnStar of elevators, basically. How about this one? This is great. The FEOK1 is the most prevalent, we would say most prevalent, right? Fire key?
Yeah, but actually, let me take the slide if
Yeah.
you don't mind. So in 2007, the elevator safety code was revised to include a standardized fire service key. The idea was to remove the need for firefighters carrying these massive key rings. They said, let's just make one key. And let's restrict it because we want to make sure this doesn't fall into the wrong hands. There's too much that could go wrong.
So it makes sense that they put in the code, you shall not have this key, it must only be limited to firefighters. It makes a little less sense
that they
put the direct bidding code in the freaking document. What? Yeah.
There's actually a funny backstory to this too, because the 2007 and 2008 code changed. In 2008, they clarified that the key was supposed to be cut clockwise with that bidding code. Somebody said, this is a bad idea. We should improve the security by cutting it counterclockwise.
So you need 2 keys for FEOK1. But in general, I mean, it's all naked on the inside. We talk about all the key switches, we talk about the systems, but, these are just circuits.
At the end of the day, most of the circuits are simply on or off. There's really nothing complex in there, and simply completing the circuit sends whatever desired message you're trying to send back to the controller. So if for some reason the panel is exposed to you, you essentially have root on that elevator.
Yeah. So let's say you're in a situation where there's a floor that's locked out, and you say, oh, I want to go up to the penthouse, the top floor, and I can't. Well, if that elevator panel is something that you can get behind maybe, so the basement doesn't work, top floor doesn't work, but if we kind of flip this number and flip that number, and whoever was in the video doing this, they go, okay, well, what do we got here? Okay, so this is the independent service key switch. What's right behind it? Well, simple freaking wire contacts. So if we go ahead and take those wires off and bridge them together, the elevator thinks the independent mode switch has been flipped. Do not do this. If we didn't make it clear earlier, these are live mains back here. These are live 120 volt current.
And we'll show you something
Yeah,
later.
we'll show you later. But sure enough, independent mode on, go where you want to go. You just have to stand there for the entire travel of the zone holding hot leads together. So that person was kind of a dumbass. But sure enough, yeah, duct tape, of course. That would be the way to do it. But there you go, get up to the top floor, etc. Why? Because that swing panel was able to be popped open with no detection whatsoever and no real prevention whatsoever of that happening. Other security that you may see in, let's say, a big building like that, we couldn't get up there because we didn't have the key card. No, I mean, whoever was in that video couldn't get up there because they didn't have the key card.
I thought this was...
It was that guy who I did that thing that time. So key card systems, again, this could be an entire talk on its own. It actually already is an entire talk on its own. Watch Major Malfunctions old talks about magstripe hacking. If you want to ask us more about how the mag reader or how the card reader or the RF reader in the cab is interacting with the controller, ask us later or ask us downstairs. For the most part, you can clone them, you can get around these systems, or just tell them to turn off. I've seen elevators where there's a key switch that says card reader enable disable. Just disable it and then the card reader doesn't care that it's there.
Would it surprise you that they're key to like also?
Yeah. So for pen testing and for getting around security, what do we do? Again, it's all about the key switches. It's all about independent service and having the right key rings. Through working with Howard, we've optimized our sets of keys through like how common they can be. So we have this key ring is really rare, leave it in the car. Then we have this key ring is pretty common, let's keep it in the red teamer bag. And then this key ring is really common, let's keep that in my pocket. So using independent keys, cutout keys, or sometimes fire keys, you can do fun things like, well, maybe this. Let's say you have a building, and at the front of this building is a security desk. And if you're going into the building, you're supposed to interact with that security desk. But this building also has a rear exit. There's people that can come down an elevator and exit through a rear door. That's a rear door you're not supposed to be able to get back in. Guess what? You can. But if you get to this elevator, even then, they figured, well, you know, what's anybody going to do? This elevator is not going to respond to any calls because people don't have the badge. If you take control of this elevator, then maybe drive it in fire mode somewhere else into the building, and get off, you have effectively bypassed the downstairs security just by having the right keys and a little bit of know-how. You're going to see a video of that happening. We might even play it twice if you don't catch it all because it's really fast. You're going to hear Howard and I say things like phase 1, phase 2. What we're doing is very quickly, with our own duplicate set of keys, flipping one mode, the next mode, registering a call, and I'm jumping on the cabinet. This is us getting in the back entrance of the facility. You can see the security cam. Door is locked. Door is not locked properly. Here's the elevator. We can get it to open its doors for us, but the only way we're getting to drive it up is with keys. I'm outside, he's inside.
Ready. On. Phase 1, phase 2.
Call is registered. I can pull my key, join him in the car. Bobak and I have done this at various facilities before. And also when you're doing that, you're not throwing all of the elevators into, you know, fire service panic where they all drop down.
Well, just to clarify, for at least the moment that you've put
Very
the car
briefly.
on phase 1, it is the bank of elevators will be on phase 1.
Yeah.
Now, in this case, we simply just turned it on that one car on a phase 2 and then yanked the key from the outside, effectively turning it off immediately, you know, within seconds, you know, to not disturb people within the building, right?
Yeah. So everyone else did briefly experience that jewel flash on and off,
Right.
but hopefully they, you know, didn't panic.
And if we can just do another quick disclaimer, we feel like we're trained professionals, and there is a whole story to this particular job where we filmed this. We accidentally took this elevator out of service, and it was a big deal.
Yeah, it took us like 20, 30 minutes of monkeying around and
It was
just
like phone calls. I don't know what I broke.
Yeah, the controller got unhappy. So again, like this is a really cool end run around security. Be aware of how that works. Be aware that you shouldn't just maybe look at the New York Post and get the keys like Yost talked about in his talk and be like, well, I'm going to get some fire keys. And the New York Post said there's no way anyone could ever do that. So yeah, just because you think you can get the keys from a little low-res photo. Oh, fuck low-res photos, right? So this is a really high-res photo of the New York City fire key, the infamous 2642 key. Would you be interested to know that A, this is an unrestricted blank, this is a standard Yale key, or as Yost found out when he was looking at the photos, it's also the same blank, you know, that Abbas uses. So he cut a nice little Abbas just looking at this. And as he was, you know, looking and cutting and measuring, he's like, that is not right. Is this right? And I said, oh yeah, I found out about that. Would you like to know the bidding code for this key? Would you believe that I'm not really breaking security here when I tell you that 2642 is the name of the key for years because 26420 is the fucking bidding code for the New York City fire key? So they could yell at that one guy on eBay all they want. Like everyone has had the name and the bidding of this key forever.
Yeah, and what's really weird about it, though, it just goes to show you how slow things can change in this industry, is that Post article ran in like 2008, I think.
Yeah.
And this has been going on for years before that even, that people were selling these keys online and on eBay. And just to be clear, I'm pretty sure that NYPD treats unauthorized possession of this key as possession of burglars' tools.
Probably. So you probably shouldn't carry this. You probably also shouldn't carry the one that works in all of New Jersey, all of New Hampshire, and all of Massachusetts. That's the 3502 key, which is also an unrestricted blank, and which also has a really stupid bidding code. No, all right.
Just
so
kidding.
the tool, they're already freaking yelling at us. That's not the bidding code. That would be that's actually the real bidding code. Yeah, get the video later, I guess. One more thing about fire service and interesting fire operations. It involves the BACnet, the Building Automation Control Network. Brad Bowers did an amazing talk about this a couple of places. It has to do with the network-enabled communication in a building where, like as Howard said, if there's a fire, but it's not in like the lobby, the fire service might not trip. Well, a big building owner might want the elevators to go on a fire service if there's a fire anywhere else. There are ways of communicating between systems. Hey, there's this condition. Hey, there's that condition. The HVAC is having a problem. There's a fire sensor here. Learning how to sniff and spoof stuff on the BACnet can cause very interesting things to happen in a big building.
And actually, if I'm not mistaken, I mentioned that dry contacts and just simply completing a circuit is the primary means by which elevators will use to enable these various modes. But actually, NFPA 2012 requires that dry contacts not be used. And Brad gets into that extensively in that talk, so it's worth checking out.
Yeah, check out his talk. He's an awesome guy. The last most powerful thing you can do to get around a building, and again, we're not advocating it, we're just going to, look cool while not dying and doing it. Hoistway access. As we said, who is more powerful than a fire operator, an elevator operator? Somebody driving the car from in the hoistway itself. Would you like to see what it looks like to get to a restricted floor by doing something that my mom thought was way too unsafe and got upset? Here we have a secure building. The footage on the lower right is the floor where we're all standing. The footage on the upper right is the destination we want to be. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to seize the top of the elevator by catching the cab in between floors, getting on top of that elevator, where only 2 of the 3 people in this footage have any business being, and somehow they didn't kick me out and let me come along. There is, as we said, there are car top run controls. And people at, let's say, MIT have known this for years. How many people have ever heard of the late night elevator rides at MIT? Yeah, this is what's happening. This is what you're doing. You're actually taking the elevator out of operation, you're running it on inspection mode, and doing whatever the hell you want. There's floor lockouts, fuck you. There's badge for this elevator, fuck you. There's a fireman who wants to use the elevator, fuck you. I'm running it from the car top, and I can go any direction we want. We can go any direction up or down. We can go, here we are, and sure enough, Howard's driving it up. We get to the next floor. What kind of security locks do you think exist inside the hoistway doors? Basically zero.
Zero, yes.
There we are.
Actually,
and we step out.
now, the NYFD actually allows you,
You can just send
to
it down.
use a lock to secure your hoistway door. It just has to be the 2642 key.
So yeah, hoistway rides, right? Now, were we using any special keys at all?
Yes.
We were using a different kind of key though, right?
Sure. So, if you ever see that little hole in the corner of the door, that is what's called an escutcheon hole. And an elevator mechanic will use a tool like this, a drop key. And essentially, they're just reaching inside. When that metal flag drops down, they can rotate the key, lift up on the flag that's attached to the release mechanism, the door opens. There are all kinds of different keys. It's really not worth getting into the different distinctions between all of these, but every door has a key. Let's just put it that way.
And some people who weren't authorized were using these keys interesting ways, right?
Absolutely. So, New York City Housing Authority is the single largest owner of elevators in the world, according to my understanding. And they have a unique experience with unauthorized use of hoistway door keys. And as this slide might suggest, what people were doing was hiding drugs inside elevator doors. Because I guess they figured, hey, who's going to look there? Well, besides an elevator mechanic, right? But they probably knew, hey, no one's taking care of these elevators anyway. So what people would do is they'd have a door key, they'd open it up, they would tape the drugs to the inside of the door where no one else could get to it, and then say, hey, I left it in that spot.
Yeah, it's
right?
in that place I put that thing that time.
So of course, there's a solution for this, right?
So the industry came out with escutcheon hole locks. They said, all right, you've got this little hole, and you don't want people sticking things through it. We'll make you a little lock that will fit right in. It'll have this mounting collar, and then if you slip the lock through, it'll just plug up the hole. And we'll give you, that nice high security tubular key, right? So we have the tubular key, opens the lock. It's just a little rotating tailpiece, just this little tail bit interacting with the fat collar on the other side. And if you don't catch what's happening there, you can see back here, the tailpiece is clear, or the tailpiece is blocking. Very simple mechanism, really neat idea, right? Now, as I said, tubular locks are what? Tubular locks are awesome, right? No, tubular locks are pretty bad. Here's the nice tubular pick that Tool happens to have downstairs. Try it, try it, try it. All right, well, that's kind of turning. And now that looks pretty turned all the way. The hardest part, just getting the lock out of the hole. There we go. Now, you might think that like, oh man, that's terrible. I guess they should use like an ACE, 2 or a really nice quality tubular lock or maybe something better than a tubular. Well, there's a much more fundamental problem that Howard realized as soon as he, bought one of these to play with it, and he showed it to me, and I was like, no way, that can't happen this way, can it?
So, if you go to the next slide,
Yeah.
you'll see that there's a tapered edge on the side that faces the general public. So, grabbing it with a tool from the outside is actually a little bit difficult.
Right.
Unless that tool.
Do you see how this installs, right? You see the collar is got two halves that screw together? So if you're outside and you have the real key, you interact with the lock plug. That's called the speedy key. If you happen to have any other tubular key ever, it won't interact with the tailpiece the right way. What it'll do with the application of a little bit of extra torque is just start unscrewing the whole mounting collar. So yeah, this is the slower key because you got to turn it a whole bunch of times. So there's your escutcheon hole lock.
Open.
Yay, open. Yeah. But ultimately, beyond that, forget getting in the hoistway. Yeah, hi there. Getting in the machine room, getting in the motor room is absolutely the end-all be-all for a lot of this stuff.
Right, so everybody here is probably in information security or has some kind of IT experience. So we've come up with this kind of analogy that we've explained, people with keys obviously have privileges and, administrators and service people within the building have escalating privileges as you go up the line. But when you're in that machine room, there's a fundamental difference between being on top of the car where you can control it without any exception. And that the only exception being that someone in the machine room could literally just disconnect the run box that you're controlling.
Yeah.
So to that extent, somebody in the machine room sort of has hypervisor access. They can actually change the parameters of the universe as the elevator controller sees it. Now, whether it's through a direct interface like you're seeing here, there are actually monitors, keyboards, and mice that are connected to modern elevators that are solid-state controlled. What you're seeing there was a group controller, and so it is showing you all of the elevators in a particular bank and how they're interacting with the demand. But again, if there's just dry contacts, somebody in that motor room can do a whole heck of a lot with just a single piece of wire. And as it turns out, we do that all the time. In fact, part of our job very frequently would involve jumping out various safety circuits during testing, which we'll get into in a second.
Like an elevator's never supposed to run if the doors are open. And really in the beginning, an elevator's never supposed to run if it's on its finals. If it hits the final limit, that elevator's dead, right? What does an elevator mechanic come out and fix? He jumps out the final. He just says, no, that circuit's not actually tripped, and then drives the elevator manually. There's a lot of interesting things, and when I started looking at some of the stuff you showed me in elevator rooms, you really start seeing notes everywhere.
Yeah, so it's hard to memorize all the different places you have to connect the wires to do various different things, so there's sort of a trend in the industry to use elevator graffiti, as they like to call it, and basically you write down, for the guy that's coming in behind you, what contact points you're working on when you
can
do
see the
various
governor
things.
jumpers here, the door locks are here, the car station's here, all the interlocks, they're just listing them on this graffiti slate.
But what's interesting is whoever did this was obviously a little bit concerned that this information shouldn't be leaked to the general public because they put it on the inside of the mainline disconnect switch. Because who's going to open up the mainline disconnect switch, right?
Well, an elevator guy.
I guess.
Yeah.
Well, actually, you're really never supposed to.
Really?
Really.
Only if you have to recycle the power because
That's
you're
for the
some bozo.
electricians.
But this is what people like Howard do to drive an elevator way beyond normal operation. When you do like a 5-year test, what do you end up doing? It's a full load, full speed hit into the buffer.
Yeah.
Right?
When you have a traction elevator, a cable-driven elevator, every 5 years you're going to put the capacity of the car plus a little bit extra inside, in usually lead test weights. Somebody will cart them in, put it inside the cab, and at full speed you'll then allow the car. At full speed, you'll crash into the buffer. But you also have to test the governor. You test the safeties. So you'll actually overspeed the car and force it to trip electrically and mechanically. So think about that for a second.
Yeah.
You overspeed it once, make it trip electrically, it should stop. Then you have to bypass the electrical portion of the safety and then actually make it trip mechanically. It is a fantastic sight to see.
Yeah, the
in real life.
idea, you know how many people you talk to your friends about having good backups and you say, well, have you ever actually like tried to restore from your backups? Have you ever wiped